Welcome to Candlelight Mystery, where shadows whisper secrets and every tale glows with intrigue. Step into a world of classic suspense, clever clues, and elegant storytelling. Light your imagination, follow the trail, and let each mystery unfold under the soft flicker of candlelight. The night was silent in the small English village of Elderbrook, silent, except for the echo of footsteps on the cobblestone path leading to Rain's Manor. It was on this very night that a peculiar letter found its way to the world's most celebrated detective, Monsieur Hercule Poirot. Inside the envelope, delicately sealed with the crest of a long-forgotten aristocratic family, lay a message written in a trembling hand. Monsieur Poirot, if this reaches you in time, then my life may yet be spared. I fear someone close to me plots my demise. My will has been tampered with. I beg of you, come at once. Margaret reigns. By dawn, she was dead. And now, as the heirs circle like vultures, the fortune of the Rains estate and the truth behind Margaret's passing rests in the hands of one man, Hercule Poirot. If you adore classic detective tales, intricate puzzles, and the unparalleled charm of Hercule Poirot, then subscribe, like, and share this video. Prepare your little gray cells, for what follows is a suspenseful, elegant, and richly layered mystery in 6 chapters. Chapter 1. The Letter and the Journey. The morning light filtered gently through the curtains of Hercule Poirot's London flat. He sat at his breakfast table, his boiled eggs perfectly symmetrical, his coffee steaming, and his newspaper folded with mathematical precision. It was a morning like any other until the doorbell rang. Poirot raised a brow. Un appel si tôt? He murmured. This is either a matter of great importance or great inconvenience. Miss Felicity Grant, Poirot's temporary secretary, while Miss Lemon visited family abroad, entered holding a sealed envelope. A special courier delivered this, Monsieur Poirot, she said. He insisted it was urgent. Poirot accepted the letter reverently, for the seal upon it was old, ornate, and unmistakably aristocratic. He slid it open with a polished silver opener. As he read Margaret Rain's trembling words, his expression grew grave. A lady in distress, he whispered, and one who claims her very life is in peril. He stood immediately, upsetting the symmetry of the breakfast table, something he rarely permitted. Miss Grant, call the 10:15 train to Elderbrook. I shall need a ticket, first class, and a carriage to meet me upon arrival. Miss Grant blinked. At once, Monsieur Poirot. The train rolled through the English countryside, wisps of fog hugging the fields. Poirot sat alone in his compartment, staring at the letter once more. Why had Margaret Rains written to him? Why now? After years of silence? And most troubling of all, why had she feared for her life because of her will? Murder, Poirot murmured, is always born of passion, greed, jealousy, revenge. But the changing of a will? Ah, that is a motive most classic. At the next stop, a tall, sharply dressed man entered the compartment. Forgive me, he said. All the others are full. May I? Poirot's eyes narrowed. But of course. The man set down his briefcase. I couldn't help noticing your destination on your luggage tag, Elderbrook. Strange place to travel to, unless you have business with the Rains. Family. Poirot raised a polite smile. And you, monsieur? You seem remarkably informed. I am Henry Allister, the man said, solicitor to the late Mrs. Margaret Rains. Poirot stiffened. Late? Yes, I'm afraid. She passed away last night. A cold silence fell. Poirot folded the letter carefully. Then the good lady's fears were justified. Allister looked startled. What do you mean? Simply that she predicted her own demise, and she summoned me to investigate it. The solicitor swallowed hard. This is quite unexpected. Poirot studied him closely. But perhaps not unpleasantly so, monsieur? I beg your pardon. Forgive me, Poirot said with utmost politeness. I merely observe. That is my profession. Allister turned away, unsettled. Poirot continued. Tell me, monsieur, did Madame Rains appear ill before her passing? No, quite the opposite. She was in excellent health for her age. Then her sudden death, you find it ordinary? Allister hesitated. Well, the doctor said heart failure. Doctors say many things, Poirot murmured, especially when the truth hides beneath layers of deception. The station at Elderbrook was small, quaint, and touched by the crisp air of approaching autumn. A carriage bearing the Rains family crest awaited them. A young woman stepped out, her posture straight, her gaze sharp. "I am Charlotte Rains," she said, "and you must be Hercule Poirot." Poirot bowed slightly. "At your service, mademoiselle." She looked him over. "Grandmother spoke of you once. She admired your precision." Poirot chuckled softly. "It is both my gift and my curse." As they rode toward Rains Manor, Charlotte's composure cracked. "You came because she wrote to you, didn't you? She knew something was wrong." Poirot tapped a finger together. "Tell me, mademoiselle, who benefits most from your grandmother's death?" She turned her face toward the window. "You'll see soon enough, Monsieur Poirot. They're all waiting at the manor, and every one of them had something to gain." The carriage rolled up to the grand iron gates of Rains Manor. A storm of secrets awaited, and Poirot stepped into the shadows with quiet determination. The great doors of Rains Manor opened with a heavy groan, as though the house itself resented welcoming strangers. Poirot stepped inside, his gaze immediately tracing the framed portraits lining the foyer walls. Generations of Rains' ancestors stared down at him with stern, aristocratic expressions, as if guarding their secrets even beyond the grave. Charlotte led him through the polished marble hall. "This way, Monsieur Poirot. The family is gathered in the drawing room." Her voice carried a note of dread, as though the very air inside the manor thickened with tension. Poirot followed, noting every detail: the faint scent of lilac, the dust on an unused cabinet, the fresh scratches on a doorframe. All small things, but to Poirot, small things were everything. At last, they entered the drawing room. Inside sat 4 individuals, each as different from the next as night and day, and each wearing an expression that shifted uneasily the moment they saw the detective. Charlotte introduced them with minimal ceremony, as though speaking too kindly of any of them would be a lie. The eldest grandson, tall, impeccably dressed, with a stiff upper lip and a calculating gaze. His voice carried the sharpness of a man accustomed to command. "So this is the famous Hercule Poirot?" he said. "Here to stir trouble, I presume?" Poirot smiled pleasantly. "I am here only to uncover the truth, monsieur. Trouble, it seems, has arrived before me." Edward stiffened. Margaret's niece, elegant, but with a nervous fidgeting of her fingers. Her eyes darted constantly around the room, as though expecting some unseen danger. "Forgive my cousin, Mr. Poirot," she said softly. We were simply not expecting outside involvement." "On the contrary," Poirot replied. "Madame Rains requested it." Lydia Paled, a distant relative by marriage, a rugged man, smelling faintly of tobacco in the outdoors. His eyes were steely, and his jaw clenched with suspicion. "What's there to investigate?" Thomas muttered. "The doctor said heart failure. Case closed." Poirot's eyebrows lifted. "Ah, but the heart can fail for many reasons, monsieur. Sometimes because it is made to fail." Thomas's grip tightened on his walking stick. A gentle woman in her late 30s, the housekeeper and Margaret's closest companion. She stood near the fireplace, her eyes red from mourning. "If anyone can uncover the truth," she whispered, "it is Monsieur Poirot." Mrs. Rains trusted him. Her sincerity stood out like sunlight in the grim room. Poirot inclined his head respectfully. From the corner, Henry Allister, the solicitor Poirot had encountered on the train, cleared his throat. "If everyone is ready, I shall begin." He opened a leather folder with deliberate slowness. Every ear leaned in, the tension thick enough to cut. Poirot watched them carefully, their reactions, their exchanges, the micro-expressions flickering like candlelight. Margaret's voice echoed through the room as the will was read. "To my grandson Edward, I leave the leadership of the Rains Foundation, on the condition that he proves worthy of it." Edward's jaw tensed, a reaction Poirot found most intriguing. "To my niece Lydia, I leave a trust fund of £40,000 to be managed carefully." Lydia released a shaky breath, relief mixed with disappointment. "To Thomas Blackwell, I leave the farmland on the northern boundary. May he tend it with better care than past seasons." Thomas grunted, though whether in gratitude or resentment, it was unclear. "And to Eleanor Finch, my dear companion, I leave Rains Manor itself, and full rights to my personal estate within it." A gasp filled the room. All eyes turned to Eleanor. Her trembling hands rose to her mouth in shock. No, she never told me. Edward stood abruptly. This is absurd. The manor belongs to the family. How could grandmother give it to a housekeeper? Poirot finished gently. Mon cher, social rank does not dictate affection. Edward glared. Alistair cleared his throat again. There is also a final sealed note addressed to the heirs. He unfolded the paper. In Margaret's unmistakable handwriting. If you hear these words, then know this. I believe one of you intends my end. My will has been threatened, my life endangered. Should harm come to me, seek the truth, and trust none but Hercule Poirot. A deathly silence. Poirot let the words linger in the air, sharp, chilling, accusatory. Charlotte whispered, She knew. She truly knew. Poirot stepped forward. Monsieur, Madame Rennes feared foul play, and her sudden death has only deepened this suspicion. I shall be conducting my inquiry at once. Edward scoffed. And where do you suggest beginning, Monsieur Poirot? Poirot touched a finger to his brow. My investigations always begin in the same place. He turned toward the staircase, the room of the deceased. A murmur passed through the airs. Lydia whispered, But it's been locked since last night. Poirot smiled calmly. Then perhaps, mademoiselle, it is time we unlock it. He gestured toward the butler, who produced a heavy brass key. As they ascended the stairs, Poirot felt it, the shift in the air, the tightening of nerves, the tremor of hidden guilt. Someone in this house was afraid of what he might find, and that, he knew, made the next step essential. Chapter 2. The Gathering of the Heirs. The corridor leading to Margaret Rayne's bedroom was long, dim, and lined with antique cabinets that seemed to observe the group with quiet judgment. Their steps echoed on the polished wooden floor. Behind Poirot walked the uneasy procession of heirs and staff, each wearing a mask of anxious restraint, each glancing sideways at one another. Poirot, however, focused ahead. At the door, the butler inserted the heavy brass key. Click. The lock surrendered with a reluctant groan. Poirot lifted a hand. Only Mademoiselle Finch and Mademoiselle Charlotte will accompany me inside. The rest of you remain here. Edward bristled. On what authority? Poirot turned, eyes narrowing ever so slightly. On the authority of logic, monsieur. You are all potential witnesses, or perhaps potential suspects. Allow me to observe the scene undisturbed. Edward clenched his jaw, but said nothing further. Poirot entered the room. It was a chamber of old-world elegance, deep burgundy drapes, polished mahogany furniture, and a grand four-poster bed with lace trim. Even in its stillness, the room carried the faint scent of lavender and aging books. Eleanor Finch stepped softly beside Poirot, her eyes moist. This was her sanctuary, she whispered. She kept it immaculate. Poirot scanned the surroundings. Yet even in a sanctuary, he murmured, disorder creeps in when something unnatural occurs. Charlotte folded her arms, watching him work. What do you expect to find, Monsieur Poirot? Poirot pointed toward the writing desk. Madame Raines wrote a letter to me, a letter penned in great distress. I will see if her agitation left traces. He approached the desk. The surface was tidy, too tidy. In Poirot's experience, desks often revealed truths about a person. Ink smudges, scattered papers, pens left uncapped in haste. Here, everything was arranged symmetrically, unnervingly so. Poirot frowned. Someone has cleaned this. Charlotte blinked. After her death? Poirot nodded. Most curious. Who would tidy a desk before the body was even cold? Eleanor hesitated. Not the staff. We were instructed to touch nothing. Poirot's gaze lingered on her for a thoughtful moment before turning back to the desk. He slid open the top drawer. Inside were parchment envelopes, stamps, a small ledger, and at the back, a broken fountain pen. Poirot lifted it delicately. The nib was bent, almost crushed. Charlotte frowned. Why would someone break a pen? Poirot's eyes gleamed. When a hand trembles in fear, or when one wishes to prevent a signature from being completed. Eleanor gasped softly. You mean someone stopped her from writing something? Poirot nodded. It is possible, yes. He turned the pen toward the light. A drop of dried ink glistened at the bent point. Black ink. Yet the letter Margaret sent him had been written in dark blue. Très intéressant, he whispered. He replaced the pen and moved toward the bedside table. A small amber bottle sat there labeled simply, Digitolin. Charlotte's brow furrowed. That's her heart medicine. Poirot lifted it carefully. The bottle was half full. Did she take this regularly? He asked. Eleanor nodded. Every morning without fail. Poirot tapped the glass lightly. And did she take it last night? I assume so. Poirot looked at them gently, compassionately yet with a sharpness that cut through their uncertainty. You assume, yes. But Madame Raines was a lady of habit. Her routines were precise. Did anyone see her take it? Eleanor shook her head. No, she retired early. I did not disturb her. Poirot placed the bottle back. Digitolin, a medicine beneficial in small doses, poisonous in excess. Charlotte stiffened. Are you suggesting? Poirot raised a hand. I suggest nothing. I observe only that a substance capable of causing cardiac failure sat beside her bed. The silence was heavy. Poirot then moved toward the window. Tall velvet drapes, drawn tightly shut, despite the early afternoon light. This is unusual, he murmured. Why? Charlotte asked. Because Madame Raines was fond of the morning sun. She always opened her curtains herself, did she not? Yes, Eleanor said. Every single day. Poirot nodded. Yet last night, she slept in darkness. He touched the curtain fabric. Cold? He parted them. Outside lay the vast gardens of the Raines estate, trimmed hedges, ancient oaks, and beyond them, the shadow of an old greenhouse. Poirot's eyes sharpened. On the windowsill was a faint smudge, a dark stain, barely visible unless one looked closely. Poirot rubbed it. Soil. Who would bring soil to an elderly lady's bedroom window? He asked aloud. Charlotte and Eleanor exchanged troubled glances. Poirot turned back toward the room, hands clasped behind him. He approached the bed, its sheets tucked perfectly, as though untouched. Eleanor, Poirot said softly, was the bed disturbed when you found her? Yes, she whispered. She was lying on it, peacefully. Poirot gestured to the bed. And yet now it is pristine. Eleanor's voice trembled. The doctor, he insisted she be placed properly, before he examined her. Poirot's brows rose. The doctor arranged the bed? Yes. He did not want the family to see her. Disheveled. Poirot resumed his calm pacing, but his mind was aflame. A broken pen. A medicine capable of killing. Curtains drawn when they should have been open. Soil on the windowsill. A bed rearranged by a doctor, a rather unusual gesture. Someone, Poirot murmured, has attempted to tidy not only the room, but the truth. As Poirot completed his circuit of the bedroom, he suddenly turned toward the doorway. Someone stood there, just beyond the threshold. A silhouette. Still. Watching. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Before he could speak, the figure stepped away and vanished down the corridor. Charlotte gasped. Who was that? Poirot straightened his tie. Someone with a very keen interest in what we discover. He turned toward the two women. Mesdames, this investigation grows more delicate by the moment. Trust only what you see, and, even then, question it. Poirot moved to leave the room. For now, we shall return downstairs. It is time, he said crisply, to speak to each heir privately. The drawing room felt even heavier when Poirot returned with Charlotte and Eleanor. Eyes turned sharply toward them, curious, anxious, guilty. The heirs sat in stiff silence, as though awaiting a verdict. Poirot surveyed them calmly. Mesdames et messieurs, he said, I will now speak to each of you alone. Secrets are like dust. They surface most clearly when disturbed. Edward scoffed. This is absurd. What do you expect to uncover? Poirot smiled thinly. If the truth is absurd, monsieur, then we must embrace absurdity. He gestured toward the small study adjacent to the drawing room. Edward Raines, he said, you shall be first. Edward bristled but rose. The door closed behind them. The study was lined with leather-bound volumes and the faint scent of cigars. Edward crossed his arms, impatience radiating from him. Let's get on with it, he snapped. Poirot sat with perfect posture. You are the eldest grandson. I assume you stood to inherit greatly? Edward exhaled sharply. Grandmother always intended for the foundation to be my responsibility. This nonsense about proving myself worthy is an insult. Perhaps she had reason to doubt you? Edward's eyes flared. I've dedicated years to preparing for that role. Poirot's brow arched ever so lightly. Yet the manor, the estate, all left to Mademoiselle Finch, the housekeeper. That must be inconvenient. Edward's jaw clenched. Preposterous is the word. Poirot folded his hands. Murder, monsieur, is often committed over what one believes they deserve. Edward slammed his fist against the desk. Are you accusing me? Poirot remained serene. I accuse no one. I merely note your passion. Edward straightened his coat. I left the manor last night at 7. I had dinner in London with colleagues. Poirot nodded. And you can prove this? Edward hesitated. Yes. Several people saw me. Poirot smiled. Excellent. Then you will not object when I confirm it. Edward's expression flickered just for a moment. Poirot saw everything. And Edward left the study with stiff strides. Poirot exhaled softly. A man full of ambition and fear. Lydia entered hesitantly, hands twisting together. Monsieur Poirot, I don't know how much help I can be. Poirot offered a gentle smile. One never knows, mademoiselle, until one speaks. Lydia sat on the edge of the chair. Your relationship with Madame Raines? Poirot asked. She was kind, Lydia said quietly. Distant sometimes, but kind. She helped me financially when I struggled. Poirot tilted his head. And now she has left you 40,000 pounds. Lydia lowered her gaze. Yes, more than I expected. But less than some might desire? Lydia swallowed. I am not greedy, Mr. Poirot. Poirot leaned back, watching her carefully. Where were you last night? Lydia hesitated. In my room here, reading. I had a headache and retired early. You were alone? Yes. Poirot drummed his fingers softly. Do you know of anyone who wished to change Madame Raines's will? A flicker of panic entered her eyes. I shouldn't say. Poirot leaned in slightly. Mademoiselle Lydia, secrets are like poison. They corrode the truth. Lydia drew a shuddering breath. Edward argued with her last week, she whispered. He shouted at her, something about the foundation's finances. I heard them. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. And what of Thomas Blackwell? Lydia stiffened. Thomas? He's unpredictable. And he hated that grandmother was considering selling the farmlands. Did she tell him this? She told me, Lydia said. But Thomas suspected. He said the land was sacred. A legacy. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Another motive, perhaps. Thank you, mademoiselle. Lydia left the room trembling. Poirot murmured. Fearful, but not false. Thomas entered with heavy footsteps. What's all this about questioning? He barked. Poirot smiled. To understand the truth, monsieur, your cooperation is appreciated. Thomas threw himself into the chair. Ask what you want. Your relationship with Madame Raines? Thomas scowled. She was family. That's enough. Poirot noted the evasion. And yet, monsieur, family can breed both love and resentment. Thomas snorted. You speak too much. Poirot's expression never wavered. You were due to inherit the northern farmland. Yes. Were you satisfied with this? I'd have been happier if she didn't consider selling the land to developers, Thomas growled. That land is Raines' legacy. Poirot's eyes sharpened. You believed she might sell it? I know she was meeting people. Surveyors. Men in suits. I didn't like it. When last did you see Madame Raines? Yesterday afternoon. She said she was tired. Told me to go. Poirot tapped his chin. And where were you last night? Thomas hesitated for the first time. In the greenhouse. Poirot's gaze flicked upward. The greenhouse? Yes. I needed time to think. Poirot asked. You did not go to the manor's upper floor. Thomas shook his head. No. Très bien, Poirot said quietly. You may go. Thomas left, but the slight tremor in his hand as he closed the door did not escape Poirot. Eleanor entered last, gentle, trembling, earnest. Poirot softened his tone. Mademoiselle Finch, You were closest to Madame Raines. Yes, she whispered. She was like a mother to me. Poirot nodded. And she left you the manor. Tears welled in her eyes. I still cannot believe it. Poirot studied her. The grief was genuine, but grief could coexist with guilt. Did she appear afraid in recent days? Eleanor hesitated. She was restless. She checked the locks at night. She asked me to prepare her tea myself, wouldn't let anyone else do it. Poirot leaned forward slightly. A tea that accompanied her medicine? Eleanor froze. Yes. Poirot's gaze deepened. Last night, who brought her the tea? Eleanor's voice thinned. I did, as always. Poirot nodded slowly. And what of the doctor? How well did Madame Raines know him? Eleanor blinked. Dr. Hammond? He has treated her for years. Poirot clasped his hands. Did you notice anything unusual when he examined her? Eleanor shook her head. Only that he hurried. Very much. And he insisted I leave the room. Poirot's eyes sharpened for a moment, then softened again. Thank you, mademoiselle. She left quietly. Poirot exhaled. Poirot stepped out of the study. 4 interviews. 4 conflicting stories. 4 distinct motifs. Edward, ambition. Lydia, fear and secrecy. Thomas, anger about the land. Eleanor, too close to the deceased. Too involved in the final hours. And above all, the doctor who had yet to be questioned. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. The little gray cells, he murmured. Beg for order. And order they shall have. He turned toward the grand staircase. It is time to examine the greenhouse. Chapter 3. Shadows in the Manor. The late afternoon sun cast long golden beams across the gardens as Poirot stepped outside, his immaculate shoes crunching lightly on the gravel path. The air smelled faintly of damp soil and wilted roses. Ahead lay the old greenhouse, its glass panes dull with age, streaked with moss, and fractured in places like spiderwebs frozen in time. Charlotte walked beside him, cautious and quiet. You believe Thomas was here last night? She asked softly. Poirot tapped his walking stick thoughtfully. He says he was, yes. But men often say many things. It is what they cannot say that interests me. Charlotte looked anxious. Thomas is temperamental, but he isn't a killer. Poirot gave her a gentle, enigmatic smile. My dear mademoiselle, temperament does not make a murderer, motives do. And here, they are plentiful. They reached the greenhouse door. Poirot paused. The rusted latch bore fresh scratches, minor, but unmistakable. Someone opened this recently, he murmured. Charlotte leaned in. Thomas? Perhaps. Or perhaps someone who wished us to think it was Thomas. Poirot pushed the door open. A musty wave of warm, earthy air enveloped them. Rows of aging wooden tables held pots of dying plants. The glass ceiling filtered the sunlight into muted greenish beams. Ivy crept through cracked panes, reclaiming the structure inch by inch. Poirot's sharp eyes drifted over. Freshly disturbed soil, a pair of muddy footprints, broken stems lying oddly on the floor. Charlotte shivered. It feels eerie in here. Poirot knelt beside the footprints. A man's boot, he concluded softly. Large size, heavy tread. Thomas? Yes, but look. He pointed to a second set of prints, faint, delicate, almost erased. A smaller shoe, perhaps a woman's, and fairly recent. Charlotte frowned. Why would anyone else come here? Poirot's eyes gleamed. For the same reason all secrets bring people together, mademoiselle, necessity. He approached a long potting bench. On it sat an overturned flower pot. Its contents spilled onto the surface. Poirot sifted through the soil with delicate precision. Something glinted. He plucked it up, a small metallic scrap. Charlotte leaned closer. What is it? Poirot examined it. A fragment from a key, he said. Old, broken, and yet recently snapped. Charlotte's eyes widened. Do you think someone tried to force one of the manor locks? Poirot smiled faintly. Not force, mademoiselle. Replace. He slipped the fragment into a small envelope. Madame Raines feared her will was being tampered with. What better way to accomplish such mischief than with a copied key? Charlotte whispered. You think someone created a duplicate? Poirot placed a finger gently against his lips. I think, my dear, that someone failed to create a perfect one. He moved along the bench. Poirot noticed a small glass vial lying on its side, liquid drying into a chalky residue. Its handwritten label read, Digitoxin. Concentrated. Charlotte gasped. Isn't that similar to her medicine? Poirot nodded gravely. Yes. Digitoxin in high doses can cause cardiac failure very similar to heart attack. Charlotte took a shaky step backward. Oh, God. Poirot lifted the vial carefully with a handkerchief. Someone handled this recently. There are fingerprints smudged, but present. Charlotte swallowed. Thomas works with chemicals for the crops. Could it be his? Poirot said calmly. Perhaps. But many things live in a greenhouse that have nothing to do with plants. His eyes drifted to a set of footprints leading farther into the structure. They followed the trail. At the far end, behind an overgrown shelf of ferns, something glimmered beneath a tarp. Poirot lifted the tarp. Beneath it stood a sturdy metal lockbox. Charlotte frowned. What could that be? Poirot knelt beside it. The lock was undone. Inside lay bundles of old documents, maps of the Rains property, surveying reports, letters signed by Margaret Rains, and envelopes marked confidential. Charlotte covered her mouth. These are grandmother's papers. Poirot pulled out one letter in particular dated 2 weeks earlier. Margaret had written, If the land is sold, the family will be in upheaval. I must tread carefully. I fear Thomas will not take kindly to the idea, but I have no choice. Someone is pressuring me. Pressuring her, Charlotte whispered. Who? Poirot's fingers turned another page. Another letter unsigned with angry scrawls. You have no right to break tradition. You'll regret this. Charlotte stiffened. That handwriting, it looks like... Poirot raised a hand to stop her. Do not jump to conclusions. The truth requires patience. He examined the documents again. One folder contained legal papers concerning the Rains estate's financial health, bank statements, large withdrawals, a series of unexplained transfers. Poirot murmured. Ah, the money. It flows like water, and yet someone thirsts. Charlotte frowned. What does that mean? Poirot's eyes locked with hers. It means, mademoiselle, that someone was bleeding funds from the estate long before Margaret's death. Charlotte staggered back. Edward? Lydia? But who would... Poirot interrupted softly. Not here. Not yet. He gently closed the lockbox. As they turned to leave, Poirot stopped suddenly. A reflection in a shattered pane of glass, faint but unmistakable, revealed a silhouette standing outside the greenhouse. Watching them, Charlotte gasped, spinning around, but the figure had disappeared behind the hedges. Poirot straightened slowly. Murderers, he murmured, are like ghosts. They appear when one least expects them and flee the moment one gets too close. Charlotte whispered, Who was it? Poirot's lips tightened. I cannot yet say, but whoever it was, they are very afraid. He stepped out of the greenhouse. The web tightens, mademoiselle, and every thread leads closer and closer to the truth. He paused, looking back at the decaying structure. But now, Poirot said quietly, we must speak with Dr. Hammond. The manor loomed ever larger as Poirot and Charlotte walked back from the greenhouse, its ancient bricks glowing faintly in the dying sun. The shadows stretched long across the lawn, twisted shapes dancing like silent watchers. Inside those walls, Poirot knew, waited a murderer, or perhaps several would-be murderers. Charlotte swallowed nervously. Do you truly believe grandmother was poisoned? Poirot's voice was soft, but firm. Mademoiselle, belief is not required. Observation is enough. The signs, they whisper, but they do not yet sing. They reached the manor steps. A figure stood waiting at the door, hands clasped behind his back, tall, pale, hollow-eyed. Dr. Hammond. Charlotte stiffened. Doctor, you did not say you were returning today. Hammond cleared his throat. I heard Monsieur Poirot was conducting inquiries. I felt it best to offer assistance. Poirot gave a polite nod. But of course, doctor, it is most fortunate. There are questions, you understand, that require the expertise of a man of medicine. Hammond seemed uneasy at the compliment. Very well, he murmured. Shall we talk inside? Poirot gestured toward the study. After you, doctor. In the study, the light dimmed, filtered through heavy curtains. Poirot positioned himself so the fading sunlight illuminated Hammond's face. It was a technique he often employed. Light exposes, shadow conceals. Hammond sat rigidly. Poirot began gently. Doctor, you were the first to examine Madame Raines. Tell me what you observed. Hammond exhaled. She was lying peacefully on her bed, cold to the touch. No signs of struggle. It appeared to be a simple heart failure. Poirot tilted his head. And you are certain? Hammond hesitated only a second, but enough for Poirot. In an elderly woman of her age, with her condition, it is the most likely scenario. Poirot tapped a finger against the table. And yet, doctor, what is likely is not always what is true. Hammond's eyes flickered. Are you implying I misjudged the cause of death? Poirot smiled gently. I imply nothing. I ask only this. Did you perform a thorough examination? Hammond stiffened. I did what was appropriate. Poirot leaned forward slightly. Appropriate for whom? For the truth? Or for convenience? The doctor's jaw clenched. Monsieur Poirot, you accuse me unjustly. Poirot folded his hands calmly. I accuse no one, doctor. I simply observe that you rushed your examination, insisted the staff leave the room, and personally arranged the bed. Hammond's composure slipped. I did so out of respect. Eleanor was distraught. I didn't want her to see the body in disarray. And did you see the medicine bottle beside the bed? Poirot asked quietly. Hammond swallowed. Of course. Poirot's voice lowered. Did you verify the dosage she had taken? The doctor hesitated too long. Poirot's eyes gleamed. You did not. Hammond's fists tightened. I saw no reason for suspicion at the time. Poirot continued smoothly. And the curtains? Did you notice they were closed? No, Hammond admitted quietly. And the broken pen on her desk? No. And the soil on her windowsill? No. Poirot sat back. Expression sereine. You see, doctor, so many small things unnoticed can form a very large picture. A long silence followed. Hammond's voice finally emerged, low and strained. What are you suggesting? Poirot stood gently. That perhaps someone wished your examination to be incomplete. The doctor blinked. What? Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. Someone wanted the death to appear natural. And if so, then you, doctor, were the ideal man to ensure it. Hammond rose abruptly, outrage flashing in his eyes. You dare. Poirot raised a hand, calm as still water. Do not mistake inquiry for accusation. If you are innocent, the truth will show it. If you are not, the truth will show that as well. Hammond trembled, whether in anger or fear. Poirot could not yet tell. At last, the doctor spoke. Madame Raines contacted me 3 weeks ago. She said she felt watched, that someone had been tampering with her papers. I examined her, then she was healthy, though anxious. Poirot's expression tightened. And what did you advise? Hammond sighed. I told her to rest, to avoid stress, but she insisted someone was after her inheritance. Poirot nodded slowly. And were you aware of the changes she was making to her will? Hammond shook his head firmly. No, that was private family business. Poirot's sharp gaze didn't leave him. But you had access to her medicine cabinet? Yes. Hammond hesitated. Well, yes, once, to refill her prescription. Poirot's eyes gleamed like silver. And did anyone else have such access? Hammond exhaled shakily. Eleanor kept most medicines locked, but the greenhouse stores, chemicals too. Thomas could access those, as could the staff. Poirot nodded. You have been most helpful, doctor. You may go. Hammond left, wiping sweat from his brow. Poirot watched him leave. Charlotte entered the study moments later, breathless. What did he say? Did he admit anything? Poirot raised a calm hand. Patience, mademoiselle. Guilt does not always reveal itself through words. Often it leaks through silence. Charlotte paced. I hate this. All of it. Why would anyone hurt grandmother? She was strict, yes, but fair. Poirot considered her quietly. Sometimes, the fairest hearts attract the darkest intentions. He stood, There is one more thing I must examine tonight. Charlotte blinked. What? Poirot's voice grew quiet, purposeful. Madame Rain's safe, Charlotte gasped. But it's locked. Only she knew the combination. Poirot smiled softly. Ah, mademoiselle. The dead often tell us their secrets if only we know how to listen. He gestured toward the hallway. Come, the safe will speak. As they walked, Charlotte whispered, Do you think the murderer fears you, Monsieur Poirot? Poirot's eyes shone. My dear, they fear not me, but the truth I shall soon reveal. Chapter 4. The Web of Motives. Night descended upon Rain's manor like a velvet shroud. The corridors glowed dimly with gas lamps, their flickering light casting long, wavering shadows along the walls. The air itself felt thicker, now full of secrets, tremors of guilt, and the faint scent of old stone and fear. Poirot's polished shoes clicked steadily as he walked toward the late Margaret Rain's private study, Charlotte trailing nervously behind him. Are you certain about this? She whispered, breaking into her safe. It feels invasive. Poirot smiled gently. Mademoiselle, invasion is only when one intrudes without purpose. But when one seeks justice, one merely rearranges the truth into order. Charlotte swallowed, but nodded. They entered the study. The room was still, silent, and lined with shelves heavy with books and leather-bound ledgers. A grandfather clock ticked softly in the corner, its rhythm steady and ominous. The scent of lavender lingered faintly, Margaret's favorite. Poirot approached the tall portrait above the fireplace. Margaret Rains, in her prime, stern but wise, eyes sharp as though they saw into the hearts of everyone in the house. Forgive me, madame, Poirot murmured, bowing slightly. But you asked me to search for truth, and so I obey. He reached up and gently swung the portrait outward. Behind it, embedded in the wall, was a heavy steel safe, dust clinging to its edges, but its dial polished from frequent use. Charlotte gasped. So there was something hidden. Poirot tilted his head. In such houses, mademoiselle, secrets rarely hide in obscure corners. No families hide them in the most obvious places, places they believe will never be questioned. He knelt, examining the dial. Now, we must find the combination. Charlotte stepped closer. But grandmother never shared it. Not with anyone. Poirot tapped the metal lightly. Madame Rains was a woman of habit, precision, and sentimentality. Such people choose their codes with emotion, not randomness. He pointed to the photographs on the desk. Margaret with her children, Margaret with her grandchildren, Margaret with Eleanor. Poirot murmured, birthdays, anniversaries, sometimes deaths. He turned the dial slowly. Edward was born on the 12th, Lydia on the 4th, but I think not. He moved lower. Margaret Rains married on the 21st of May, 1957. He spun the dial. 2, 1, 5, 7. A soft click echoed through the room. Charlotte gasped. You did it! Poirot's eyes twinkled. When one respects order, mademoiselle, numbers speak. Poirot opened the heavy door. Inside lay a collection of documents, bundles tied with ribbon, envelopes bearing wax seals, diaries bound in cracked leather, and at the very back, a thin wooden box. Charlotte whispered, This must be important. Poirot removed the wooden box with care. He opened it. Inside lay a stack of letters, some typed, some handwritten, some torn, some sealed. Poirot unfolded the first. It was addressed to Margaret from a legal firm in London. Mrs. Rains, we urge you to reconsider the withdrawal of such funds. Removing large sums so quickly raises suspicion and could result in investigation. Charlotte frowned. Large sums? From the estate? Poirot nodded slowly. It appears someone was draining her accounts long before she updated her will. He opened another. This one was handwritten, with an elegant but trembling script. I cannot protect the estate much longer. Edward grows increasingly hostile. He demands more control. I fear he suspects my intentions. Charlotte pressed a hand to her mouth. Edward. She feared him. Poirot raised a calm finger. Fear is not proof, mademoiselle. It is merely a window. He picked up another letter unsigned. The handwriting slanted and harsh. You won't take what's mine. I don't care what the lawyers say. This family is built on tradition. You will not ruin it, Charlotte whispered. That sounds like Thomas. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. It could be. But handwriting can be imitated, and anger is a language spoken by many. Poirot placed the letters aside and lifted a small black book. A ledger. He opened it. Carefully written entries filled the pages. Donations made. Funds transferred. Repairs scheduled. Staff salaries. Estate maintenance costs. Everything was precise until the last 2 pages. Poirot's brows lifted. Ah, Ichi. Here we find chaos. Charlotte leaned over. Inkblots. Crossed out on trees. Numbers rewritten several times. Someone tampered with it, she whispered. Poirot nodded. Yes, recently. And in haste, he examined the corrections. Notice, mademoiselle. The handwriting is slightly different. The pressure is harder. The tilt changes. Charlotte frowned. Meaning? Poirot looked up. Meaning the last entries were not written by Madame Raines. Charlotte tensed. So someone was altering her books, she whispered. Covering their tracks. Poirot closed the ledger delicately. And who, mademoiselle, in this house has the strongest motive to disguise financial misdeeds? Charlotte's breath caught. Edward. Poirot gave a small nod. But he is not the only one. Lydia feared debts. Thomas feared the sale of land. Even Eleanor, if the inheritance surprised her, might have reasons concealed beneath kindness. He stepped back from the safe. Each heir holds a thread of motive. But who wove the rope? Suddenly. Knock, knock, knock. 3 slow, heavy taps on the study door. Charlotte startled. Who could that be at this hour? Poirot straightened his jacket. Let us see, mademoiselle. He opened the door. On the threshold stood Lydia Marsh, eyes red, hands trembling, clutching something to her chest. Monsieur Poirot, she whispered shakily. I found something, and I think it proves who killed Aunt Margaret. Poirot's expression remained perfectly still, but his mind sharpened like a knife. Mademoiselle, he said gently, come inside, and show me what you have. Lydia stepped forward, holding a small blood-stained handkerchief. Lydia stepped into the study with hesitant, trembling footsteps. The dim lamplight flickered across her pale face, casting jittery shadows that echoed the fear in her eyes. She clutched the small handkerchief as if it were burning her fingers. Poirot closed the study door gently behind her. Mademoiselle, he said softly, you mentioned you found something. Where? Lydia's voice cracked. In the linen cupboard, outside grandmother's room. I was searching for comfort, something of hers. Instead, I found this. She extended the handkerchief. Poirot took it carefully, using his gloves. A dark, rusty stain marked the white cloth undeniably blood. Charlotte gasped. Whose blood is that? Grandmother's? Poirot shook his head slowly. No, Madame Raines did not bleed before her death. This is fresh, from the last 24 hours. Lydia's voice quivered. I swear I've never seen it before, but look. She pointed to the embroidered initials stitched in one corner. T.B. Charlotte froze. Thomas Blackwell. The room fell into a trembling silence. Poirot examined the handkerchief closely, then turned it over. Something else was there. A faint smear of dark earth along the edge. Soil. Charlotte's eyes widened. That's the same soil you found on grandmother's windowsill. Poirot nodded slowly, thoughtfully. The very same. And Mademoiselle Lydia, this handkerchief was folded when you found it. Yes, she whispered. Hidden among the linens? Yes. Poirot set the handkerchief on the desk. So someone wished to conceal it. Charlotte's voice tingled with urgency. Poirot, you said the soil on the windowsill came from outside. Could Thomas have climbed into her room? Poirot raised a finger. Possible. But we must not leap, mademoiselle. Murder thrives on assumptions. He turned to Lydia. Tell me, mademoiselle, why bring this to me? Why not to Edward? Or the police? Lydia exhaled shakily. Because I fear someone will twist the truth. I don't know whom to trust. Poirot nodded, satisfied by her sincerity. You did well to come to me. She wrung her hands. Do you think Thomas could have hurt her? Truly? Poirot's gaze drifted back to the handkerchief. Tebe. Soil. Blood. Hidden. It is a question, Poirot said quietly, that requires a most delicate answer. He paced slowly, hands clasped behind his back. Consider, mesdames. Thomas admits he was in the greenhouse, and the greenhouse, as we know, contains digitoxin capable of inducing cardiac failure. Charlotte nodded nervously. Poirot continued, and now we have a handkerchief bearing his initials stained with blood, found near the deceased's chamber, and soil matching that from the garden. Lydia whispered, It looks terrible for him. Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, only to the untrained eye. For the trained eye, it looks too terrible. Charlotte blinked. Tout terrible. Poirot nodded. Yes, murderers do not leave such obvious breadcrumbs unless they wish them to be found. The two women exchanged startled glances. You mean someone planted this? Lydia breathed. Poirot clasped his hands tightly. Perhaps it is a clue, or perhaps it is a trap. He turned toward the window, thoughtful. A murderer with finesse leaves subtle traces. A murderer with fear leaves loud ones. Too loud. Poirot walked back to the safe, tapping its metal surface. Let us revisit the night of Madame Rain's death. He raised a finger. 1. She wrote to me in desperation. She feared imminent danger. A. Second finger. 2. She attempted to sign or write something more, perhaps a warning. The broken pen suggests an interruption. Third finger. 3. The curtains were drawn. She never drew them herself. Fourth finger. 4. Soil beneath the windowsill. Charlotte whispered, So someone entered through the window? Poirot nodded slightly. Or attempted to. Or wanted it to appear so. Fifth finger. 5. The medicine bottle digitolin, capable of being tampered with. Lydia swallowed. And Thomas had access to chemicals. Poirot raised a hand. Yes, but so did others. The greenhouse was not kept locked. Staff entered freely. He turned toward Lydia. And mademoiselle, you said you found this in the linen cupboard. Anyone could place something there. Her voice trembled. So, it could be a frame job. Poirot smiled slowly. My dear, it smells like a frame job. Suddenly, slam. A door somewhere in the hallway crashed open. Charlotte jumped. What was that? Poirot moved to the study doorway and peeked out. Footsteps thundered down the corridor. Heavy. Angry. Thomas, Charlotte whispered in horror. And indeed Thomas Blackwell appeared at the far end of the hall, face red with fury, coat unbuttoned, boots muddy. He stormed toward the study. What's the meaning of this? He bellowed before even reaching them. Poirot stood perfectly calm. Thomas shoved into the room. You? All of you? I heard you've been asking questions about me, accusing me. Charlotte backed away. Lydia trembled beside the desk. Poirot raised a hand gently. No accusations, monsieur. Only inquiries. Thomas slammed his fist on the table. That's my handkerchief, isn't it? Edward said you found it? Charlotte looked shocked. Edward knew? Thomas glared at Poirot. I lost that handkerchief yesterday in the garden. You're twisting it. You all want me to look guilty. Poirot examined him quietly. Monsieur Blackwell, he said calmly, I believe you misplaced your handkerchief. Yes. Thomas froze, startled by Poirot's tone. Poirot continued softly. And I believe someone else picked it up. Someone who needed a convenient suspect. Thomas's eyes widened not with guilt but confusion. You don't think I did it? Poirot smiled gently. I think, monsieur, that you are many things stubborn, angry, impulsive. But a murderer? No, not by nature. Thomas blinked, stunned into silence. Poirot stepped closer. But I also think you are hiding something. Something you fear will make you look guilty, even if it is not murder. Thomas's jaw tightened. I didn't kill Margaret, he muttered. But there is something. Something I saw. Poirot's eyes gleamed. What did you see, monsieur? Thomas swallowed, as if bracing himself. I saw someone near Margaret's window that night. Charlotte gasped. Who? Thomas hesitated, then whispered. Eleanor. The room fell silent. Charlotte covered her mouth. Lydia staggered. Poirot's expression sharpened. "Eleanor Finch," he said slowly. "At the window of the deceased, on the night she died." Thomas nodded. "Yes. And she wasn't alone." Poirot leaned forward. "Who else?" Thomas met his gaze, voice trembling. "I saw Edward." Chapter 5. A clue in the quiet hours. The study fell into a suffocating silence. Charlotte whispered, barely audible, "Edward? And Eleanor? At grandmother's window?" Thomas nodded, breathing heavily as though he had just confessed to a crime himself. Poirot did not move. He simply observed in that still, razor-sharp way only Poirot could. After a long pause, he spoke softly. "Describe exactly what you saw, Monsieur Blackwell." Thomas wiped his brow with a shaking hand. "It was late, maybe close to 11. I couldn't sleep, so I left the greenhouse to clear my head. The moon was out bright enough to see shadows. As I walked toward the manor, I saw movement near the east side." Poirot nodded encouragingly. "Yes, continue." "I hid behind the sycamores. 2 figures were standing by the garden path right below Margaret's window." Charlotte's voice cracked. "Eleanor? Are you certain?" Thomas clenched his jaw. "The first was Eleanor. She was wearing that gray shawl she always has. I recognized her shape, her posture." Poirot tapped a fingertip to his chin. "And the second?" Thomas swallowed. "The second was Edward." He kept looking around nervously. Eleanor pointed. "Toward the greenhouse, then toward the house. They talked for a minute, couldn't hear what. Then they went inside through the side door." Charlotte staggered backward. "Pale. That's impossible," she whispered. "Edward said he was in London. Eleanor said she was in her room." Poirot turned to her gently. "People often hide truths for reasons we do not yet understand." Lydia clutched her arms. "So Eleanor lied to protect Edward? Or Edward lied to protect himself?" Poirot raised a hand. "Calm. Précise. Mesdames, do not rush. Lies may shield innocence as much as guilt." He turned back to Thomas. "One question, monsieur. Why did you wait until now to say this?" Thomas's jaw tightened. "Because it looked bad. I thought, what if I was wrong? What if the moon played tricks on me? And—" Poirot stepped closer, his voice softening. "And you feared that revealing you were near the greenhouse might make you look guilty." Thomas nodded a chamet. "Yes." Poirot placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You did the right thing at last." Thomas blinked, surprised by the kindness. Poirot turned to the women. "Now we must confront truths, dangerous truths." He walked slowly toward the fire, hands folded behind him. "Let us consider the implications." He raised one finger. 1. Eleanor was near the greenhouse the night Madame Raines died. A second finger. 2. Edward was not in London as he claimed. Charlotte whispered, "But why lie?" Poirot responded quietly, "Because lies are easier than motives." A third finger. 3. Eleanor had access to the tea and medicines. 4. Edward had financial motives, significant ones. 5. The window shows evidence of disturbance. Soil. Smudges. A possible entry or exit. Lydia hugged herself tightly. "You mean they worked together?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Not necessarily. Collaboration is not the only thread that ties 2 people to the same place." He turned toward the desk and lifted Margaret's ledger once more. Perhaps each had their own reason for approaching Margaret's room. He paused, or perhaps one followed the other. Charlotte gasped. "So, it could have been a confrontation?" Poirot nodded. "Possibly. A confrontation. Or a conspiracy." Poirot picked up the blood-stained handkerchief again. "And this little square of cloth, it complicates matters," Charlotte whispered. "How?" Poirot held it up to the lamplight. "Because someone went to great lengths to hide it, folded neatly, tucked into the linen cupboard. Not thrown away, not burned." He traced the embroidered letters. "Tepe," Lydia said quietly. "You believe someone planted it to frame Thomas?" Poirot nodded. "Oui. It reeks of orchestration." He dropped the handkerchief back onto the desk. "And orchestration implies intelligence." Charlotte looked troubled. "You mean Edward?" "Perhaps. But Eleanor is not without intelligence either." "And," Lydia? Charlotte asked softly. Poirot gave her a steady look. Do not underestimate anyone in this house. Lydia's face paled, but she nodded silently. The clock ticked loudly. Poirot suddenly paused, eyes narrowing. Mademoiselle Charlotte, he said softly, fetch me the candlesticks from the mantel. She obeyed, puzzled, bringing 2 heavy silver candlesticks to him. Poirot placed them on the desk perfectly parallel. Now, he said, look at the dust around them. Lydia stepped closer. The dust is disturbed, she whispered. Oui, Poirot said quietly. Someone removed 1 candlestick recently, and not carefully. Charlotte frowned. That doesn't mean anything. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Oh, but it does. You see, very few weapons are so readily available in a manor as a candlestick. Lydia gasped. You think someone struck Margaret? Poirot raised a hand. No. The doctor saw no blunt trauma, but the movement of objects, especially when done secretly, reveals someone was searching or hiding. Charlotte whispered. Hiding what? Poirot leaned forward. That, mademoiselle, is what we must now discover. Suddenly, tap, tap. A soft, hesitant knock rattled the study door. Thomas flinched. Lydia stiffened. Poirot stepped forward smoothly. Enter, he said. The door creaked open, and in the doorway stood Eleanor Finch. Her face was ashen, her eyes swollen from tears. Her hands shook uncontrollably. Monsieur Poirot, she whispered, I need to speak with you at once. Poirot stepped aside. Come in, mademoiselle. She stepped inside, glancing nervously at the others. I heard you were looking into last night. I can't hide it anymore. Charlotte leaned forward breathlessly. What can't you hide? Eleanor closed her eyes briefly as though summoning strength. Then she said, I saw someone go into Margaret's room just before she died. Poirot's voice remained steady. Who? Eleanor trembled. It wasn't Thomas. It wasn't Lydia. It wasn't me. Poirot waited. It was... Her throat tightened. It was Edward. Eleanor's confession hung in the room like a cold mist. Charlotte trembled. Lydia gripped the back of a chair. Thomas's eyes widened in stunned silence. Poirot, however, remained perfectly still, unblinking, measuring. When he finally spoke, it was in a voice soft enough to calm a storm. Mademoiselle Finch, begin at the beginning. Eleanor clasped her shaking hands tightly. I didn't want to say anything earlier. I was terrified of how it might look, but I cannot keep it secret anymore. Poirot nodded gently. Take your time. Eleanor inhaled deeply, steadying herself. It was last night, near midnight. I had taken Mrs. Raines her evening tea. She said she was tired and asked me to leave her be. Poirot nodded. As she usually did? Yes, Eleanor whispered. She valued privacy. And then? Poirot pressed gently. I went down the corridor, but I forgot my shawl. I'd left it near her door, so I turned back. Charlotte gasped softly. She didn't mention that earlier. Eleanor squeezed her eyes shut. I was afraid. I thought it would sound suspicious. Poirot nodded. Truth often does. Eleanor continued. As I approached the door, it opened very quietly. I hid in the shadows. And then, Edward stepped out. Lydia sucked in a sharp breath. So Thomas wasn't lying. Poirot's eyes gleamed. No, he saw what he claimed. Eleanor nodded shakily. Edward left her room, adjusting his jacket, looking shaken. Not angry, not rushed, just pale, very pale. Charlotte whispered, Did he see you? I don't think so. He left quickly, down the servants' stairs. Poirot leaned forward. And what did you find when you entered the room? Eleanor hesitated. I knocked. She didn't respond. So I opened the door. She was lying on the bed, peaceful. Her voice cracked. Too peaceful. Poirot touched her arm gently. You are certain Edward had been alone with her? Yes, Eleanor whispered. There was no one else. Silence wrapped the room again. Poirot walked slowly toward the fireplace. He stood with his back to the room, hands clasped behind him. His voice was quiet, but edged with the sharpness of truth. Edward lied about being in London. He lied about the dinner. He lied about the timeline. He lied about seeing Madame Raines last. Charlotte's eyes burned with anger and disbelief. He wouldn't hurt grandmother. He wouldn't. Poirot turned to her, expression soft but firm. Mademoiselle, love blinds us more than hatred, Lydia whispered. And Eleanor seeing him? That's almost proof. Poirot raised a hand sharply. No, it is one piece of evidence. But evidence requires interpretation. Thomas scowled. Interpret what? He was there. Poirot smiled faintly. Thomas, you saw them outside the manor earlier in the evening. Eleanor saw him inside, just before midnight. The timing is curious, but not conclusive. Charlotte crossed her arms. What more do you need, Poirot? He lied. He sneaked around. He was in her room. Poirot paced slowly. And yet, he stopped. And yet, does this sound like the behavior of a cold, calculating murderer? Someone who poisons an old woman so her death appears natural, then clumsily sneaks out of her room at midnight, leaving the window disturbed, leaving traces on the sill? Charlotte blinked. What are you saying? Poirot's voice sharpened. I am saying, mademoiselle, that if Edward planned murder, he would not have needed to enter her room at all. A shiver ran down Lydia's spine. You mean, he might have gone to check on her? Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Yes, to check, not to kill. Eleanor frowned. But why lie? Poirot answered softly. Because guilt is not always guilt of murder. Sometimes it is guilt of cowardice. Poirot returned to the desk. He picked up the handkerchief, again examining the soil and the blood. Then he looked at Charlotte. Mademoiselle, you said Eleanor brought the tea every night. Yes, she whispered. Poirot turned to Eleanor. And last night, mademoiselle? Eleanor's voice shook. I did bring it, as always. Poirot folded his arms. But the teacup was clean. Eleanor froze. What? Poirot nodded. I inspected the tray. The cup had been washed, the spoon dried, the saucer spotless. Charlotte frowned. That doesn't make sense. Poirot stepped closer, eyes gleaming. Mademoiselle Finch, why would you wash the cup after her death? Eleanor took a step back. I didn't, I swear. Poirot nodded. Which means someone else did. Thomas whispered. Someone who didn't want us to know what was in the tea. Poirot raised a hand. Precisely. Poirot's voice grew low, steady, razor sharp. Madame Rain's death did not occur immediately. Digitoxin, if indeed used, causes weakness, dizziness, vomiting, confusion, then cardiac collapse. The room filled with dread. Poirot continued. She drank her tea at night. She wrote a message to me, fearful. She attempted to write something more, but the pen broke. He turned to Charlotte. If the tea contained poison, then she would have begun to feel ill shortly after. Charlotte whispered. But then, someone might have entered her room to help her. Poirot nodded slowly. Or to finish what the poison began. Lydia gasped. Oh God. Poirot looked up sharply. Now we must ask, who washed the cup? Who hid the handkerchief? Who rearranged the bed? Who tampered with the ledger? Who needed Margaret Rain's dead before the will took effect? Charlotte's eyes widened. You mean someone knew she was changing the will? Poirot nodded. Someone who desperately needed the inheritance sooner than later. Before anyone could speak again, bang, the manor doors slammed downstairs. Voices erupted in the hall. Lydia screamed. Thomas jumped. Poirot strode to the doorway. Stay here, he commanded. He stepped into the corridor, Charlotte and Lydia peering from behind him. Down the staircase, two figures stood in tense confrontation. Edward Rains and Dr. Hammond. Edward's face was livid. Dr. Hammond clutched an envelope in his hand, an envelope bearing Margaret's seal. Charlotte gasped. What is that? Edward shouted. You had no right to hide this from us. Hammond barked back. It was addressed to me. Her instructions. Poirot raised his voice. Monsieur, enough. Both men turned sharply toward him. Poirot stepped forward, eyes burning with authority. What, he asked coldly, is inside that envelope? Neither man spoke. Poirot took a step closer. For I believe, he said softly, that it contains the key to Margaret Rain's death. Chapter 6. The final confrontation. The envelope trembled slightly in Dr. Hammond's fist, as though the paper itself wished to escape the tension filling the grand hall. Edward's face flushed with fury, his voice cracking under the pressure of outrage and fear. "You had no right to keep my grandmother's instructions from me," Edward barked. "They were meant for you," Hammond retorted, "and I was to follow them quietly until the proper moment." Poirot stepped forward, raising one elegant hand. "Messieurs, this is neither the time nor the place for shouting. Now, Dr. Hammond, hand me the envelope." For a moment, Hammond hesitated, his eyes darting to Edward, then to Charlotte, then back to Poirot. Finally, with a defeated sigh, he extended the envelope. Poirot received it with the same delicate reverence one might show a priceless relic. The seal was unmistakably Margaret's, deep burgundy wax pressed with the Rains crest. He held it to the light. "This seal was not broken until just now," he murmured. Charlotte gasped. "So the doctor truly didn't open it?" Poirot nodded. "Yes, he obeyed her last directive." Edward spat bitterly. "And what directive was that?" Poirot opened the envelope. Inside lay a single sheet of paper, thin, crisp edges, slightly yellowed. Poirot unfolded it. Eleanor, Charlotte, Lydia, Thomas all leaned closer. Poirot read aloud. "Dr. Hammond, should anything befall me before my will is formally amended, I entrust you to deliver this letter only when Hercule Poirot arrives. He is to read it first. Tell no one else. Margaret, Rains." Edward scoffed loudly. "Ridiculous paranoia." Poirot raised a brow. "Your grandmother trusted me, monsieur. The question you should ask yourself is, why?" He resumed reading. The second paragraph was written in a tight, hurried hand. "I believe someone close to me intends my harm. The estate funds have been tampered with, old documents altered. I have been approached with threats subtle, but unmistakable. Should I perish before changing my will, know this: the culprit will be among those who stand to benefit most." Charlotte inhaled sharply. "But that could be anyone." Poirot held up a finger. "Continue listening." He read the third paragraph. "Check the greenhouse. Check the old ledger. Check the drawer beneath my writing desk. There you will find what was meant to remain hidden." Thomas blinked. The greenhouse, the ledger, the drawer. She knew. Poirot's lips curved slightly. "Yes, monsieur." She knew. Lydia whispered, "What's in the drawer?" Poirot folded the letter carefully. "That," he said, "we shall inspect in due time. For now, note what she does not mention." Eleanor frowned. "What do you mean?" Poirot lifted the page. "There is no name. She did not accuse anyone directly." "Why?" Charlotte said softly. "Because she wasn't sure?" Poirot shook his head. "No. Madame Rains was a woman who never doubted her own instinct. She knew. But she wanted me to find the truth without her influence. She knew the accused would manipulate her words if she named them." He stepped closer to the group. "This letter tells us two things. One, Margaret Rains feared for her life. Two, someone believed her new will would ruin them." Edward's mouth opened in protest, but Poirot silenced him with a single raised hand. "Before we proceed," Poirot said, "I must ask each of you a question." He turned slowly, addressing them in turn. "Monsieur Rains, why did you lie about being in London last night?" Edward stiffened, jaw tightening. "I didn't want to be accused. I came to see grandmother because she sent for me earlier that day. She said she needed to speak with me privately." Poirot narrowed his eyes. "And did she?" Edward nodded, swallowing hard. "She told me she was rewriting the will." A murmur rippled through the room. Edward continued, voice shaking. "She said the foundation would remain mine, but only if I agreed to stricter oversight. I was furious. I stormed out. I regretted it. Later, I returned to apologize. But she was already asleep. I didn't know. I didn't know she was dying." Poirot studied him carefully. "Mercy. That is truthful, or very well rehearsed. Mademoiselle Finch, why did you hide your sighting of Edward?" Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't want him blamed. He was like a grandson to her. I thought maybe he was just checking on her. And I was afraid of being accused myself." Poirot nodded. "Fear makes honest people behave dishonestly. Mademoiselle Marsh, did you know Margaret was revising her will?" Lydia shook her head vigorously. No, but she seemed on edge. She told me I must prepare for changes. I thought she meant emotional changes, not legal ones. Poirot's gaze softened. Your honesty is appreciated. Monsieur Blackwell, what were you truly doing in the greenhouse? Thomas exhaled. I was drinking. She told me she might sell the land. I was angry, but I swear I never wanted her dead. She was family. Poirot nodded. Anger does not equate to murder, but your presence that night remains useful to someone else. Thomas frowned. Useful? To who? Poirot's eyes gleamed. To the one who planted your handkerchief. Poirot turned toward the staircase. We have now reached the point where the next clue must be examined. He lifted Margaret's letter. She mentioned the drawer, the one beneath her writing desk. Charlotte's breath caught. You think she left something there? Poirot nodded. Without doubt. He gestured for the group to follow. Come, the hour is late, and the truth is impatient. They moved through the dim corridor like a procession of ghosts. Back into Margaret's bedroom. Back into the chamber of secrets. Poirot knelt before the writing desk. He pulled open the lowest drawer. Inside lay a single envelope. Unsealed, its contents waiting like a heartbeat paused mid-throb. Poirot drew out the paper. Charlotte gasped. Lydia whispered, Prayer. Thomas stiffened. Eleanor covered her mouth. Edward paled. Poirot unfolded it. A single line was scrawled across the page. Messy. Rushed. Desperate. It read, It's not the heirs you must fear. It's the one who tends the house. Poirot's eyes lifted sharp as a blade. Mes amis, the murderer is someone far closer than any of you imagined. The silence in Margaret Rain's bedroom was suffocating. The air heavy with the weight of the single, trembling line Poirot had read, aloud. It's not the heirs you must fear. It's the one who tends the house. Every face in the room shifted fear, shock, suspicion. Lydia stepped back instinctively. Charlotte's lips parted in disbelief. Edward swallowed hard. Thomas clenched his fists, eyes narrowing. And Eleanor Finch, her face drained of all color. Poirot turned toward her slowly. The one who tends the house, he repeated gently. That is you, Mademoiselle Finch. A whimper escaped her lips. Monsieur Poirot, I would never harm her, never. Poirot raised a hand calmly. Perhaps, but we must examine the facts, not the fears. He took a step forward. Eleanor Finch, you alone had daily access to Madame Rain's tea and medicine. Eleanor shook her head violently. No, I swear it, I only ever. You alone tended her room, Poirot continued, and could alter the scene without drawing suspicion. Eleanor pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. You alone could hide a handkerchief in the linen cupboard without being noticed. Tears welled in her eyes. I didn't. Someone is framing me. Poirot's gaze softened not in sympathy, but in calculation. Perhaps they are. But let us continue. He turned to the others. Eleanor is not the only one who tends the house, he said quietly. There are also the servants, the groundskeepers, and someone else. Edward frowned. Who? Poirot lifted a finger. The one responsible for the administration of the house. The group exchanged uncertain looks. Lydia whispered, You mean Eleanor doesn't handle the finances? Poirot nodded. Correct. She manages the care of the home but not the accounts. He turned his sharp gaze to Edward. Who manages the accounts of the Rains household, monsieur? Edward hesitated. That would be Dr. Hammond. A stunned silence. Dr. Hammond stiffened, face tightening, as if struck. Charlotte gasped. The doctor? But why would he? Poirot stepped between them. Let us review Margaret's warnings. He lifted the letter from the safe. She said the estate funds were being tampered with. He pointed to the ledger, and the last entries were altered by a different hand, heavy, rushed. Poirot tapped the papers in front of him. The doctor had access to her records, her medicines, her trust. Eleanor whispered, Dr. Hammond visited often, far more than any illness required. Hammond's face hardened. You're twisting things. Poirot lifted a single hand, silencing him. And Margaret Rains trusted him completely. He was her physician, her confidant. He saw her almost daily. Charlotte's breath trembled. And he arranged her bed after she died. Poirot nodded gravely. Oui. A most unusual act. One that destroyed valuable evidence. Hammond snapped. I did it out of respect. Poirot's eyes glinted sharply. You did it to hide the truth. The doctor stepped back. You have no proof. None. And prisons. Poirot took another step forward. Oh. But we do. He lifted the blood-stained handkerchief. This, Monsieur Doctor, is not Thomas's blood. A ripple of shock ran through the room. Thomas blinked. What do you mean it's not mine? Poirot smiled softly. Because I tested the scent earlier. It is from a deep cut, a narrow blade, not a fall. And the earth on it is from the garden path leading to Margaret's window. He held it closer to Hammond. And you, Doctor, have a cut on your hand. End quote. His voice was calm, but lethal. A cut from a broken fence picket near the greenhouse, where someone tripped in haste. All eyes turned to Hammond. His hand, yes, there it was, a bandaged slice on his palm. Hammond hid his hand behind him, but too late, Charlotte whispered, horrified. He lied. He said he cut it opening a parcel. Poirot's voice was icy smooth. Dr. Hammond hides his lies as poorly as he hides murder. Hammond's face flushed dark red. You're inventing? Fantasies. Poirot shook his head. No, I am assembling truth. He pointed to the vial from the greenhouse. Digitoxin was taken from the greenhouse and administered slowly to Margaret over several nights. He pointed to the teacup. The teacup was washed by you, Doctor, because you feared traces of digitoxin might remain. He pointed to the ledger. You altered her accounts, siphoning funds for your own use, knowing Margaret intended to restrict financial access. Charlotte gasped. He stole from her. Poirot nodded. Yes. And when she confronted him, he knew he would be exposed. Poirot's voice dropped, quiet but cutting. And so he decided to silence her before she could amend her will. Hammond's breath hitched, panic rising. You can't prove any of it. Poirot's eyes sharpened, the little gray cells blazing. But of course I can. He turned to Eleanor. Mademoiselle, you saw Edward leave the room, but you did not see the doctor, did you? Eleanor blinked. No. But Poirot lifted a finger. Exactly. Because the doctor was already inside, hidden behind the dressing screen. The room gasped. Lydia covered her mouth. Thomas stared in disbelief. Edward's fists tightened. Poirot continued. Voice précise. When Edward left, Margaret was alive but weak. He thought she slept. Then you entered, Eleanor. Moments later, he turned to Hammond. And only after Eleanor left the room did you emerge and finish what you began. Hammond shook, his head violently. You're lying. Poirot raised the final page from the drawer, the scrawled warning. It's the one who tends the house, Margaret, Poirot said softly. Knew you would be the last person anyone suspected. The kind doctor, the trusted administrator, the gentle caretaker. Poirot stepped closer, his voice turning cold as steel. You poisoned her. You washed the cup. You altered the ledger. You planted the handkerchief. You lied to the heirs. You rushed the examination. You rearranged the evidence. He paused. And you almost succeeded. Hammond backed away, voice trembling now. No, I... Poirot raised his hand. Mes amis, the murderer is Dr. James Hammond. Chapter 6. The Final Confrontation. Dr. Hammond stood frozen, his back pressed against the cold wooden paneling of Margaret Raines's bedroom wall. The lamplight flickered across his trembling features. Sweat pooled at his temples. His breath came in staggered, bursts half fury, half terror. Edward surged forward, face red. You killed her? You murdered my grandmother? Poirot raised a hand not to comfort Edward, but to keep him from doing something foolish. Control, monsieur? Poirot murmured. Rage is natural, but justice requires clarity. Hammond swallowed hard, his voice cracking. You have no proof, only theories. I cared for Margaret. I would never harm her. Poirot's gaze sharpened to a polished needle. You cared for her? Money, doctor. Not for the lady herself. Charlotte's voice trembled. But why? Why would you do this? You had everything: respect, trust, a good position. Poirot nodded slowly. Indeed. But he also had debts. A life outside this village, one full of indulgences, expensive habits, perhaps even blackmail. Hammond flinched. Poirot continued. Margaret discovered discrepancies in the household accounts. She trusted the doctor with financial oversight too many years. When she confronted him 3 weeks ago, she threatened to replace him, Thomas Muttered, and so he panicked. Poirot's voice flowed like silk. Exactly. Murder committed in panic is sloppy, but murder committed in fear. He paused. That is the most dangerous kind. Hammond shook his head violently. You can't prove the ledger was altered by me. Poirot lifted a ribbon-bound stack of papers from the desk drawer. But this doctor can. He handed the pages to Charlotte. What is this? She asked, scanning the handwriting. Poirot answered, the missing pages from the original ledger. Removed and hidden by Margaret, clever woman. Charlotte's eyes widened. These entries, they show withdrawals. Tens of thousands. Poirot nodded. And all signed under the doctor's authorizing hand. Hammond sneered. She was old, confused, probably misread. Poirot spoke over him, firm as granite. Margaret Rains may have aged, monsieur, but she never lost her mind. She anticipated being silenced. That is why she hid these pages and wrote me the letter. Lydia whispered. She knew she might die. Poirot nodded again. And she trusted I would see what others dismissed. Hammond's face twisted. You can twist any coincidence into accusation. Poirot lifted the blood-stained handkerchief. This is no coincidence. You cut your hand on the garden fence when you attempted to exit through the east side after poisoning Margaret. He pointed at Thomas. You took Thomas's handkerchief earlier that day, when he dropped it near the greenhouse. You used it to staunch your own bleeding, then planted it in the linen cupboard to frame him. Thomas stepped forward, fists clenched. You sneaky. Poirot blocked him gently. Non. Let him speak his lies. They reveal the truth. Hammond snarled. And what of the window? Anyone could have touched it. Poirot nodded. Yes, but only someone who needed to hide how he entered her room. Charlotte blinked. You mean he didn't come through the door? No, Poirot said softly. He entered through the service passage, the same passage Eleanor often used. Unseen. Quick. Poirot paced slowly, voice like a Kiat storm. When Margaret drank her poisoned tea, she grew weak. Too weak to shout, too weak to fight. She went to her desk, perhaps to write one last warning. But the doctor appeared behind her. She tried to strike him or push him away. The pen broke in her hand. Eleanor gasped. That's why the nib was bent. Poirot nodded. Yes. The struggle was brief. She collapsed on the bed, the poison already in her veins. And the doctor, knowing her death would soon appear natural, simply waited. Charlotte whispered in horror. He watched her die. Hammond shook violently, voice hoarse. You're lying. She died peacefully. I tried to save her. Poirot regarded him with icy calm. Non. You rearranged her body to look peaceful. You washed the teacup. You fixed the bedsheets. You closed the curtains to hide the moonlight that would reveal the disturbed windowsill. Poirot stepped closer, one step, then another, until he stood inches from Hammond's face. And this is the truth you cannot escape. Poirot lowered his voice. You were the last person in Margaret Rains' room, and she knew it. Hammond's eyes darted wildly. His breathing quickened. Edward growled. You killed her to protect yourself. You stole from her. You ruined her. Eleanor sobbed. She thrusted you. Hammond's voice finally snapped, shattered like glass dropped on stone. Yes, I was there. The confession echoed across the room. Charlotte gasped. Lydia clutched her heart. Thomas cursed under his breath. Hammond trembled. Yes, I went into her room, he choked. She confronted me. She said she would expose everything, ruin me, destroy everything I built. Poirot whispered, and so you destroyed her instead. Hammond squeezed his eyes shut. It was supposed to look peaceful, painless. Poirot stepped back. Murder is never peaceful, doctor. Not in the soul. Hammond sagged, defeated. His voice broke completely. I didn't mean for it to go so far. I only meant to weaken her, delay her, But she grew worse. Poirot finished quietly. And then, you finished the job. The doctor collapsed to his knees. Edward moved to strike him, but Thomas caught his arm. No, Thomas growled. Let Poirot finish. Poirot turned to the room, his voice calm. Once more, mes amis. The murderer stands revealed. 2 servants appeared at the door, startled by the commotion. Poirot lifted his hand. Send for the constable. Hammond bowed his head. Defeated. Ruined. Edward stared at him with hatred. Charlotte with grief. Eleanor with heartbreak. Poirot stepped aside as the servants hurried off. Behind him, Hammond whispered, Margaret was right to fear me. Poirot closed his eyes briefly. And yet she faced that fear with courage. You, doctor, faced it with cowardice. Justice at Elderbrook. The morning after Dr. Hammond's arrest dawned with a strange stillness over Elderbrook. The mist rolled quietly over the countryside, the chimneys of the old Rains Manor rising through it like solemn monuments to secrets finally unearthed. Dawn light filtered through the manor's fractured windows, illuminating dust motes drifting like memories suspended in the air. Inside the drawing room, Hercule Poirot stood by the tall windows, hands folded neatly behind him. He watched constables escort Dr. Hammond through the iron gates, head bowed, steps trembling. The weight of his crimes pressed heavily on his shoulders. Poirot breathed out slowly. Murder, he murmured, is the most cowardly of crimes. But murder born of fear is the most tragic. Charlotte entered the room quietly. She looked pale, exhausted, but steadier than the night before. Is it truly over, Monsieur Poirot? Poirot turned to her, with a gentle smile. Yes, mademoiselle. The truth stands firm now, and truth, once exposed, leaves no shadows for guilt to hide in. Charlotte sighed, her eyes glistening. I still can't believe it was Dr. Hammond. He was practically family. Poirot nodded. A serpent often sleeps in the garden we trust. He hid his greed beneath white coats and gentle words, but Madame Rains saw past the disguise. Charlotte sat down heavily. She was smarter than any of us knew. Poirot's face softened. She was a woman of great strength and foresight. She summoned me because she knew her death would be disguised. She left clues like stepping stones. She ensured the path to justice was illuminated. Charlotte smiled weakly. And you followed it perfectly. Poirot chuckled modestly. My little gray cells simply obeyed their nature. Later that day, Henry Allister, the solicitor, returned with a sealed envelope in hand. Mrs. Rains' revised will, he announced quietly. She completed it only hours before her death. Dr. Hammond tried to keep it from being filed. He cleared his throat and unfolded the document as everyone gathered in the drawing room. Edward, visibly shaken. Lydia, pale but relieved. Thomas, arms crossed but calmer. And Eleanor, tearful, hands wringing nervously. Poirot watched all of them carefully. Guilt, fear, resentment, all were dissolving into something else now. Something quieter. Something closer to healing. Henry began reading. To my grandson Edward, I leave the leadership of the Rains Foundation, but only with a full independent financial audit and oversight from a trusted firm. Edward swallowed. That's fair, he murmured softly. Poirot raised an approving brow. Growth begins in accountability. Henry continued. To my niece Lydia, I leave not only the £40,000, but also a personal letter advising her toward wisdom and independence. Lydia wiped her eyes. She really did believe in me. Charlotte put an arm around her shoulders. Next, to Thomas Blackwell, I leave the northern farmland, but with a written agreement protecting it from commercial sale for 10 years. Thomas nodded slowly, relief softening his stern face. And finally, Henry concluded, to Eleanor Finch, I leave Rains Manor for her loyalty, her care, and her honesty throughout the years. Tears burst down Eleanor's cheeks. I don't deserve this, after everything. Poirot stepped toward her. On the contrary, mademoiselle, you were Margaret's greatest comfort, and she knew your heart pure, loyal, and unswayed. Eleanor clasped her hands to her chest, weeping quietly. Edward approached Poirot afterward, shame flickering across his face. You were right, he murmured, about everything. I hid the truth. I acted cowardly, but I didn't kill her. Poirot nodded gently. Yes, monsieur. You lied out of fear, but fear makes fools of us all. What matters is that you will now honor her legacy. Edward swallowed and nodded. She deserved justice. Thank you. Poirot smiled lightly. Merci. But it was she who guided me. I simply listened. Charlotte joined them, offering Poirot a warm, emotional smile. Will you stay for one more night, Monsieur Poirot? The manor feels safer with you in it. Poirot chuckled. Alas, mademoiselle, I must return to London. Miss Lemon becomes anxious when my schedules are disrupted. Charlotte grinned faintly. I suppose even great detectives have routines. Poirot straightened his tie proudly. More than most. As the sun dipped behind Elderbrook's rolling hills, Poirot walked slowly down the manor's front steps. Charlotte, Lydia, Thomas, and Eleanor stood together at the doorway, a family no longer bound by suspicion, but by shared truth. The air was fresh, touched by the scent of earth and the fading blossoms of autumn. Poirot paused, looking back at the estate. Au revoir, Rains Manor, he said softly. Your shadows were deep, but your secret deeper. Charlotte stepped forward one last time. You truly are remarkable. Poirot placed a hand to his chest with a humble bow. And you, mademoiselle, possess strength greater than you know. She blinked back tears. Will we ever see you again? Poirot smiled warmly. Where there is mystery, where there is disorder, Hercule Poirot is never far. With that, he tipped his hat, turned, and walked toward the waiting carriage. As the wheels rumbled over the cobblestones, and the manor slowly receded behind him, Poirot looked out at the quiet English countryside, golden under the fading light. Another case closed, another truth restored, another soul avenged. And in the crisp wind, it felt as though the spirit of Margaret Rains whispered a final thank you. Poirot nodded to himself. A pleasure, madame, he murmured. A pleasure. Thank you for joining this original Hercule Poirot mystery. If you enjoyed the twists, the clues, and the classic detective style, then like the video, subscribe for more mysteries, comment your theories, share with fellow detective story lovers, activate your little gray cells, and stay tuned for the next Poirot adventure.